you. And just a little bit, I'll introduce myself, and then Shari, and we'll go through it. But I've been teaching for a couple of years here at the University of Maryland, the Do Good Institute. But mainly the last 30 years, I've been involved as a practitioner of international development and nonprofit leadership, and imperfectly, I might add, but I've learned a lot through the things that have gone well and not so well in my career. And I've written a couple of books, but I'm not like a heavily academic, published PhD, but what I bring more is the practical knowledge, and it was fun to share with the students. I've been working for 30 years with the Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus, who founded the Grameen Bank, and I continue to work with him to this day. So what we're going to do today is finish introducing ourselves. We're going to go right into a simulation that we did in the fourth class, and that's going to hopefully get you all participating. Then we're going to describe the course a little bit. We're going to talk about a key assignment, which is each student develops their personal philosophy of nonprofit leadership and management. Then we're going to go to a class that really meant a lot to you, Shari, which helped bring together your final paper. And then we're going to close, take questions really throughout, and then we're going to hear some nuts and bolts about the program. So with that, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit more. One of the star students from this course last fall.
That's quite a compliment. Thank you. There were a number of very engaged individuals in the class, so I'm honored if I'm even considered among them. My role as a student in the class was a little, I came out of left field because I arrived at the University of Maryland this past fall. This is my first year in this area, to pursue a doctorate in musical arts degree. I'm a professional singer, and I've worked in higher education administration for a number of years at another university, and I thought, gee, it's time to become a doctor so that I could teach at the collegiate level. And music is my primary field. But when I was in the process of enrolling in my classes, I got this random email that said, hey, students, did you know that there's a certificate program available in nonprofit management and leadership? And I thought, well, gee, this is very appropriate, because I also, in addition to teaching, I also like to work with nonprofit arts organizations, and wouldn't it be nice if I had some codified structural education to point me towards resources that would help in a professional capacity once I graduated. And I thought, I'm going to be here anyway. I might as well take all of the classes that the university has to offer. So that's how I ended up in the course. And I thought it was a really nice mix. The class had a wide spread of different backgrounds, different ages, different phases of life. I thought that was pretty cool.
Very good. So let me just say two things before we dive into the simulation. One is that our objective here is not only to describe the course so you know what it is, but actually deliver some content, create value for you today, and also want to create some value for me today. But for the feedback I get from you, help me tweak the course for the future. Now, there's some challenges to that. You all haven't done the readings related to what we're talking about, as my students would have done. Participating, you're going to use hopefully the chat box, and hopefully that's clear how to do that. If not, we'll get a little advice. And again, your level of engagement and just throwing out your reactions to questions and problems that we pose. And this is very much in the context of the style of the class. A lot of freewheeling discussion, throwing ideas out there, some of them coming from the readings and people's own personal experience. So I hope you engage. And so let's go into this. So we had the fourth class was about being the public face of a nonprofit. If you're the leader, and you're also the internal leader, but you're also the leader and so I threw out some readings, and then as class approached, I thought, one of the biggest tests of being a public face is in a crisis. So while there were no readings exactly led to this, I've developed this simulation, and we're going to now present it to you right now. So the scenario that explained to my students without any preparation.
No prep. Thanks.
And I said, imagine that you're the nonprofit leader. You show up to work one day after a major and unexpected external event has happened that's negatively going to impact your organization for at least months. So the governor is elected unexpectedly and you're a pro-life group, or vice versa. Or if you're an immigrant rights group, Trump is elected, but you expected Hillary Clinton, and there are a couple more. Make one up if you want to, or just let it be generic. But something's happened that's significantly bad and unexpected, and you're 8:30 at your desk. You couldn't sleep probably that night too well, and your board chair calls you at 8:30 and says in 90 minutes you and she are going to address the staff. Imagine you have 20 staff, including 4 direct reports, and then in an hour after that, you're going to record a 10-minute video to go on your website to your external stakeholders. So the assignment was, first, how do you use the next 90 minutes? You have 90 minutes to prepare for this. Your board chair, she's on her way. What are you going to say to your staff, your 20 staff? And what are you going to say in this video that's going to be a more shorter focused thing? So I hope that some of you on the line will start just throwing out ideas. In a moment, I'm going to be silent to give you just a chance to think, but I hope you're already thinking. But Shari, with that, before we go to how you answer this, what was it like to go through this? Just was your experience of this exercise?
Well, my first encounter with the scenario, when it was sprung on us at the beginning of the class, my first thought was, I don't want to be the one dealing with this. Very candidly, it was, it's like, oh, well, this is a sticky situation, and I would like to just be told what to do. And so, in that sense, that's kind of counterintuitive, I think, as a leader. But I think it's important to acknowledge that that's not that's not an unusual reaction, and I think that's kind of a part of the processing of the scenario. But right away, after dealing with that issue, I think my next step, if I had to approach this, would be to do some independent planning first myself, because while I do want input from other people, I like to first have an opportunity to collect my thoughts independently. And we'll talk more about personal philosophies later, but my personal philosophy leans towards a succinct form of communication. And so I would want time to really get to the heart of what the organizational goals are for the company. Whatever we are doing, I want to make sure that we are still focused on our mission in the company. And then I would want to make sure that I divorced my personal thoughts about whatever the crisis was, whatever went wrong or was surprising, whatever drove the board of director, the director to come to class.
Okay, so let's pause there.
Yeah.
So and in this, as we kind of feel Shari both talking about how it was and also in talking about the things that she came up with. My role in an exercise is not to say, oh, that's the right answer, wrong answer, but just to push people's thinking and have people build on it and figure out what's authentically.
Certainly no right or wrong answer.
So so this is great. We just got I was hoping. Thanks for breaking the ice. I think your name is Carlena, and someone. So you said acknowledge the fears and uncertainty that may come from the event. So I think that's really important.
Very important.
And I think
that's step 3.
And I think that that so many people, they want to project, and I've made this mistake as a leader. You want to project confidence. You want to not have people go down that kind of almost like a paralyzing depression, but to not acknowledge that is you almost lose people out of the gate.
Right.
Now again, all these things are organization specific, depending on how they've dealt with crises. But that's, for most organizations, I think that would be a very powerful way to deal with it.
Yeah.
And then one of the questions is, do you lead with that? And I assume you're talking to your colleagues. Do you lead with that? Do you bring that in a little bit later? Do you leave that to your board chair? Again, no right answers, but these are the kinds of things you're thinking about. So it looks like we're getting a couple of other things here, and The Charles has said, emphasize your commitment as a leader to the organization and to working through the challenges the crisis will present to the mission. But what do you think about that, Sharon?
I think that this is an excellent action item, and I wonder how it would be executed, because it seems great on paper, and I don't know quite how I would put it into practice. But that's the kind of thing you would need details of the scenario to work through. But
I think what Charles is getting at, and it's a really good point. In a crisis, there are some leaders that go missing, and you wonder if are they paralyzed? Are they just starting to freshen up their resume?
Yeah.
And so their commitment to the organization, unless you have, some people will take it as a given, but frankly, I've run an organization that I founded, in which case, you're going down with the ship. But if you come in and you're, the fourth person to run the organization, doing it for 2 years, maybe, you're there as just a kind of a holding pattern.
Right.
Maybe the salary's good. Who knows so that emphasizing the commitment, and think about, for those of you on the line, and again, how you can do that, how you can do it in a way that sounds authentic for you. One of the things in my book, it's coming out, which was in some sense an outgrowth of the course, called Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind, is I said, in a crisis situation, some people adopt a very different persona than they have the rest of the time. They're much more aggressive, much more passive, much more consultative, much less consultative. I think that's normally a mistake. I think you need to adopt a slightly different persona, but if you're too different, people are like, who's inhabiting our leader?
Yeah, it could really create some uncertainty. If people are expecting you to react in a certain way and you don't as the leader, then they might not know what their next course of action should be, or how that leader will react if they take action. Yeah. And I actually think that the scenario has changed slightly since we did it in class, because I'm not, maybe my memory is faulty, which is like 80% likely, but making the 10-minute video, I feel like that was something that the class threw out as a possible way for the leader to then address the public as the front-facing entity of a company. But I mean, kind of what you spoke to having the leader even show up, or maybe having the leader disappear. The fact that the leader is going to make a 10-minute video, I think that also speaks to something. So so that was a change I noticed.
So and one of the things I recently did this with an undergraduate class who had less work experience, but they actually did a really nice job. And one of the things that we talked about, I can't remember so much in our course, is also what are the things not to do. and so that's, I welcome people to, if they have some thoughts on that. But let's, from those of you in the webinar, we'll spin this out for a few more minutes at least. So you said in the preparation period. Right. So people have kind of talked about what do you tell your staff and maybe externally. But one of the things you said is use that 90 minutes to kind of steady yourself and to come up with a kind of succinct statement. You didn't kind of run on, which takes you a little time, a reflection time.
Yeah.
What else would you do or avoid doing during that 90 minutes when you could do a lot of things, or you could just kind of sit and meditate and think what?
Well, I don't think I would spend my whole 90 minutes doing one thing. Okay. It would certainly be multiple things. And one thing that would not be one of those things is definitely gossip. It is not the time for speculation. It is not the time to bring in, even if my colleagues are also my friends, it's not an opportunity to create excitement over speculation. Ooh, what if XYZ happens? Because there's nothing worse than just generating crises built on crises, and that's not useful. It's not productive. So that's where I wouldn't go.
Yeah. Okay. One of the things, and love to hear from some more people in the webinar, wherever you may be. One of the things that looks like we've got another one coming in, but one of the things that I think you can almost not do too much of it during good times and crisis times in a nonprofit is ask people for advice. Sometimes I often start with my most generous financial contributors, people that are the key emotional linchpins and intellectual linchpins of my staff, my donors, my board, because two things tend to happen. One is that I might get some good ideas.
Right.
I demonstrate that I'm curious about it all. And people are flattered. I'm going to help shape Alex's, seriously, almost making me like for co-leader. And so that's a tool that probably wasn't in my toolbox as much. Or I might have just asked early in my career, the one person who's I thought there was my second board chair, Susan Davis, was like a big sister to me, but smarter and just more capable in so many ways.
That's what big sisters are. Yeah, they're supposed to be.
And but I realized that what if I could do that with 7 or 8 people? Not all of them would have equally good advice, but it has other functions as well. So
right.
Not have a sense of urgency and not say anything after unexpected event. An audience will notice this. So that's a really good. Thanks for picking up on this. What not to do is right. People, when you don't convey a sense of, there's this fine line. You don't want to be panicked, but you also don't want to be complacent or passive or just say, well, we'll figure this out, or this will just pass.
Right.
That kind of feigning, and I've probably made that mistake where I've just said to people, just let it roll off. Just get back to work. That people feel like you're out of touch as a leader. And also just some people. In fact, one of the things that I might do in this case is before that all staff meeting, I might either convene my 4 senior direct reports and ask them what I should be doing and what they intend to do. I also might just go around to the offices of all 20 staff and just check in. How you doing? We're getting together at 10. Did you see the email? This is a horrible situation. We'll be coming together in a few minutes. So just touching base with people and conveying that you realize that this is an issue. I'm gonna maybe not come up with a plan in 90 minutes. That might not be the best plan, or in 2 hours. But
I don't think so.
we're going to reconvene in 3 days and actually present and develop and finalize a plan of action.
Yeah, and I do like what you've mentioned about going around an office space and speaking with individuals, just checking in. Well, maybe this is just a personal management style, but I very much appreciate the one-on-one human contact. A lot of what I found unappealing about the thought of getting an education in business and management and entrepreneurial activities was that it seemed very disconnected. It seemed like a lot of theory and not a lot of practice, but one-on-one communication is all about intrapersonal relationships, and I think that's essential in terms of leadership. So that would absolutely be part of my 90 minutes, where I would want to go around and not necessarily get feedback about what to do next from every person, because I think that would be too many sound bites flying in my direction. But I would want to demonstrate that I cared about how other people felt and that their opinions were valid, and that an organization is not held up by an individual. It is held up by many individuals.
And so maybe if you it's like to take the emotional temperature of your organization, but also try to nudge it in a direction that you'd like it to go to. So I'll mention one other thing, and it looks like we have at least one more coming over the webinar. I'm so happy that you all are participating. But one of my undergraduates said something, and it made me think, is like you might want to actually check to make sure that what's happening is really what's happening. Right. Do some fact checking. Maybe there's a recount. Maybe the governor who's against your whatever position, maybe is a disputed election. Maybe the thing you think is so bad, maybe it's a little different. So don't before you launch into something, make sure the situation is more or less what you believe it to be. I remember on the day after 9/11, those of us there were lots of fake rumors floating around that day, and it took about 24, 40 hours to actually know what was true and what was a rumor. So anyway, this probably went on in the class for 45 minutes. Each student kind of built on the approach of the others, and some of them said, well, that might work for you, but that's not how I would do it. And there was it's based on the person, the leader, and the organization. The last thing, I would not act. So this is. I would not act as if the crisis will have no effect on the organization. I would acknowledge that it might present challenges. We will get as much information as we can, and can decide how to act. So that's. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's. I think I like gathering information. I think it's really important as a leader to operate based on fact, not on rumor, not on internal temperature, not on the phases of the moon.
One of the things I like about this is that there's a tendency among leaders to make promises in those moments that you might not be able to keep.
Right.
And I think what was being said here, which I agree with, having lived through some of these, is that you want to reassure, but you only should reassure things that you're pretty darn sure you can deliver on. So one of my undergraduates doing this exercise, just again very recently, said, well, tell them there'll be no layoffs. Well, you want to be, unless you have an endowment or unless you have reserves that you can say that, then it's tempting, but then when it happens, you lose credibility, frankly, in all future crises. And so this is really good thinking here. So we're going to go on, and I want to talk to you about just about the course, give you a little survey of it. We're not going to linger on this long, but this is more. First of all, this is really the teaching style. So, I put out a decent amount of reading.
I would say a lot of reading. I'm just going to go ahead and edit that.
All right, strike that from the minutes, please.
Yes.
So I put out, some now the
substantial reading.
Now people tend to, some students would say, I love the reading, but it was a little too much.
Yeah, that's.
And so what I do is, out of respect for the students who are also a lot of them working professionals, I say, listen, if you're only going to read 3 of the 5, here are the 3 of the 5.
I did like that. That was very much appreciated.
I try to be. I want them to read all. If I didn't want them to read all 5, I wouldn't have assigned all 5 or 3 or whatever. Yeah. Then we have, unless there's a big assignment due that week, we have an online discussion. So I threw out some, and I actually said like 300 words or less. There weren't any of those contributions that were close to 300. They were more like 600, 900, 1,200.
Yeah, sorry.
And no, I thought it was great. And so that kind of primes the pump. It helps the students. A professor who's taught a lot more than I did said it helps the students synthesize the readings as they go into the class. But you guys took it more seriously than even we thought. A lot of freewheeling discussion I pick up things from the online discussion going in a day or two before. And we just kind of go where we want to go. We don't talk about every article. Sometimes we'll do an exercise that doesn't exactly flow out of it. And I almost never do death by PowerPoint is not part of this course.
I don't think we had.
Well, we had a guest speaker or two.
But they brought the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
So he doesn't do PowerPoint.
Although one of my course evaluations said I should do some, and so I'm thinking of it. Now people in the class generally have some experience with nonprofits and some in leadership roles. So we try to bring that in, not everyone. And then we use those case studies. Now, if people don't want to share, it's a traumatic part of their thing. They don't have to, but many of them do.
And I found the class to be most effective with experiences. Certainly for myself, I was able to use my own experiences, but hearing about other people's real-world experience was incredibly helpful.
Yeah. Again, we do these exercises, simulation. There's no textbook, and we occasionally have guest speakers join the class, and also Professor Grimm was kind of technically co-teaching with me. He came and co-taught with me once and took over the class twice when I had to be out of town, and he's, terrific. And then so what I do is I try to facilitate these discussions, draw out of people what they think, nudge them a little bit, push their thinking. Well, why would you think that? And then kind of at the end, I tend to offer my views, synthesized, but I don't.
That's why we stayed until the end.
I don't typically, and the end was usually 9:30 at night. So, and now. And I would welcome, as we go into this next slide, if anyone has questions about the style of the course, which will probably change a little bit if I teach it again in the fall, hopefully with some of you involved. This is, for this kind of course, this is a style that I think tends to work. So what are the basic, this is not week by week, but it's a little bit. First of all, we start off with what are the basics of nonprofit? Make sure everyone is nonprofit literate. Before this course, I had actually never read the part of the tax code forms the basis for the nonprofit tax law, which is 501c3 and 501c4
Neither had I.
and 501c6.
That's not
We use those terms, but I never read it. So we actually dive into those and issues of private and public benefit, which are at the core of that. Then we talk about, in general terms, of nonprofit leadership. What is it? And what is it not only to lead an organization, but to lead a movement? And this idea of collective impact, including some critiques of the collective impact idea. And what is advocacy? What's the role of not just service delivery, but trying to change the way public policy relates to societal problems? Then the public face, which is where we did the simulation. We talk about governance, both in terms of boards, and I talk about how one case where I got actually kicked off a board
That was a fascinating story.
through either my misbehavior or the misbehavior of others. That's for others to judge. Also about how nonprofits relate to government.
Yeah.
We integrated that as well. We talked about fundraising and the role of the leader. How do you, this balance between innovation, coming up with new ideas in nonprofits versus taking existing good ideas and bringing them to scale, and are there trade-offs? Monitoring and evaluation, measuring impact. So you're doing something, you're training a lot of people. Great, that's a nice output, but what are the outcomes? What is the impact? And we some great readings on that. Operations and technology. So the COO, we kind of train people. If maybe you're going to be a COO, one of the students actually felt that was maybe her calling. That was an insight. Or even if you're not, you got to oversee that role.
Right.
So what is a great? We found this nonprofit operations handbook put out by like the Wyoming Nonprofit Association, and it's really good.
Yeah.
And the role of technology. We don't, by the way, do finance because there's a whole course on nonprofit finance given by this wonderful man, Nathan Dietz. And I didn't feel like I had that much to add to that. We talk about managing volunteers, organizational culture, managing staff. We're going to come back to this. This was like a real highlight, I think, for you.
Definitely.
So are we getting any questions, comments, objections?
No objections. That's excellent.
Okay. Well, then that might be your role. So now I'm going to talk a little bit before we go into a kind of start to a little more content. So this idea of a personal philosophy of nonprofit leadership and management. I thought this was a risk because it really requires the students to go pretty deep. And as one of the students who took the course said, this was the most frustrating and rewarding assignment I've ever done in my whole academic career. But you need to be willing to go through that frustration, but at the end, you all came through, especially you, Shari, wonderfully. But you just invested yourself in this exercise. So let me describe it. And those of you who've not done the course, start thinking about if you were to kind of start cobbling together what is your philosophy of nonprofit leadership and management. What would be your guiding lights in that role, whether you've been in one or you're aspiring, or maybe you're in a board supervising someone. That's risky because you don't want to too much impose your philosophy on them, but it might be valuable to at least share it. What would be the core pillars? You could probably come up with those just in even 2 or 3 minutes. What the course does, it gives you a lot to build it out in more detail, but think about the pillars and try to stay away from just these buzzwords like transparency and accountability. Yes, but go a little deeper.
It was very difficult to understand, how to go deeper. Because I kept getting stuck on cliche. Mm-hmm. Be true to thine own self.
But boy, you broke through with that in your final paper.
Yeah,
I was so. So this is each person has come up with their the format, style, and length of the statement is up to each student. I mean, I literally said that if you want to do a video, you want to present it through a video of interpretive dance. Go if that's what's going to be meaningful for you, do it. Now I'll have to figure out how to digest that and grade it. But this is I want these things to be something that people refer to and build on for years, not just something used for this course. Also, I'll say interestingly, I was finishing up a book that is coming out that I mentioned earlier, 275-page version, which is kind of my book is kind of my personal philosophy. So I was working through this and myself, which made it a pretty interesting process for me. Again, it was meant to be a living document that they would guide them and might even guide them in other leadership roles and ones church, which of course churches are nonprofits, but in a for-profit workplace, whatever. No right answers. So this is one thing. So Professor Grimm and I are both strong advocates. Let me give you an example that I think was meaningful for some of the students. Professor Grimm and I are both strong advocates for integrating volunteers into even mature organizations with a lot of staff and experts that they might have. Professor Grimm believes that it is okay in some circumstances to have paid staff report to a volunteer. I, on the other hand, I could never imagine myself doing that. Now, I've seen people make it work, but my leadership philosophy, that's crossing a line that I'm not willing to cross. For him, he would do it. So the point is that not that his is right for him, mine is right for me, and even though philosophically we're pretty aligned on that, we diverge. And so the question is not is explain why that's integral to your philosophy as it relates to volunteer. Now, what we do is we have the students midway through the semester present a draft, and the drafts, I would say, were they served the purpose because they were not nearly as built out. They seem to be done in a bit of a rush, kind of a midterm hangover, whatever, call it what you will.
I don't know what you mean.
I thought that, but it actually allowed people to get, you get that first lousy draft up on paper, and it's a small percentage of the grade, but I think it contributed to the final products being. I mean, I was so proud of not just you, but I was like, man. So then people present orally their final papers, and then they can get input, and then they use that to do their final. And I mentioned this recently. One of the students wrote this to me afterwards. So Sharon, tell us a little bit more about your experience of this process. You did just such a fantastic job.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind. The midpoint in the semester rough draft that I submitted. I had approached it with this idea of, okay, I'm going to make sections, and because I like to be organized, and sections are going to help me organize my thoughts, and that's great, except that for every section, I assumed there'd be a right answer. And so I did research, and I looked back at the articles that we had discussed in class, and I used citations from those articles, and what I got was a lovely book report that ended up not having any definitive answers in any capacity. And then I was so mad about this assignment because I thought, well, shoot, I've been an excellent achievement monkey where I did exactly what I thought I was supposed to do by using the class resources, and yet it didn't work out in my favor, and I'm not pleased with the product, and I'm not pleased with the grade, and I can tell that it was not pleasing, and no one was pleased. There was no pleasure at all derived from the draft process. But when I went back at the end of the semester, we had to, and I'm not sure if we're going to talk about this, but the shadow assignment, which was another large part of the class, I also found that to be incredibly frustrating for logistical reasons, just because of the nature of my work. But we, at the end of the semester, presented orally about these shadow experiences. So
just to explain, I should have mentioned this, but the paper is just, the quality of the paper so overwhelmed me, I almost forgot about other things. Each student chose a nonprofit leader to shadow for between a half a day. Oh, two, that's right, we changed that. We two different, so they could compare management styles, and shadow them between half a day and a full day. Right. And that had not been tried before, the two shadowings. I combined threw out another assignment that has been in this course in the past, and then and it was go through an informal but semi-structured process. And then the biggest thing that did was seem to feed into these final papers.
It was the real world application of watching a leader in action that helped me understand that I could make decisions. I could make choices about my management style is X. My leadership philosophy leans towards Y. And that was very important. And so it wasn't until the presentation of my shadow experience and the positive feedback that I got from you in that, which was, hey, tell me more about this terse verse. thing because I have this running joke with my mother about the fact that I like to use very succinct language because I think that if something is worth saying, you can boil it down to 2 words or fewer. Now, as an academic, I realize that's nonsense. But in my personal life, sit down, go away, love you, shut up. Those are phrases that are very communicative with only 2 words. So we dubbed this the terse verse, and that became the corner piece of my personal philosophy because I very much value the time and resources and energy of the people that I work with because I also value those things.
It's a way of showing them respect, among other things.
And it's a very personal thing that I really didn't consider to have any value. I enjoy being quirky and kind of off the beaten path and throwing out little quips or little sound bites that are useful and so I didn't realize how impactful that terse verse concept could become in my personal philosophy document. And so when Alex was giving me feedback on my presentation, which I just used the terse verse phrase just in passing, that all of a sudden clicked, and then I went home and rewrote my personal philosophy in the span of 48 hours.
So that was kind of my role in the process. Is Shari was giving some of the management, consulting, philanthropy buzzwords of the day, transparency, accountability, you name it. And those have their role, although I urge people to dig underneath. What about when transparency gets hard?
Yeah.
But I said this terse verse thing. I said that's your face lit up when you said it. You maybe meant it as a joke, but I think that's I think that could be at the core of your philosophy, and it sounds authentically like you, not just like some generic thing.
I didn't pull it out of an article.
So again, I want to urge people on the phone, if you want to throw out just what you think, perhaps the leadership philosophy of people you've admired as leaders, what yours would be, grapple with this, and we're going to in a moment kind of questions you have about this process. And how, and by the way, one of the things that I do in all my classes, I think it's quite unique to me, is I encourage people to send me drafts of their papers, even the draft of the draft in the mid-semester if they want to, because my goal isn't to trick people into getting low grades and misunderstanding it. The way the real world works in the nonprofit world is, you're writing a grant proposal, you're writing a board report, you want to share your thing as it evolves, and so sometimes I grade a certain student's paper 3 times, and it makes 3 times as work for me. But I want them to and I urge them to get feedback from others as well. But let's move on here. Really, again, I'm definitely going to keep this as the course. So let's go now. You were struggling a little bit. And yet we had a course on changing organizational culture. Yeah. I want to urge you on the phone to think about where you have ever seen an organizational culture that you may have been involved in, an organization you may have been involved in, where the organizational culture changed fairly quickly in a very positive way. And how did that happen? You may not even know, or you may have a hypothesis, but those things don't. People try to change organizational culture sometimes for years with no impact. And sometimes it happens. And we had a reading. One of the readings in this course was, and we took several that were from the for-profit and business sector. We looked at Paul O'Neill as the chairman and CEO of Alcoa, and who really changed the culture there. In this chapter about so-called keystone habits. But again, how did this? You were a little bit adrift on your personal philosophy
Very
paper.
much adrift.
And how did this class, really one of the last ones before the finals, how did it all, the light go on? Tell us about that.
Well, I had taken a class a year earlier as just for funsies about organizational culture and how to speak about organizational culture, because I didn't know any of the correct terminology. It was just like, well, this place is fun, or this place I feel bogged down, or this place everyone feels burnt out. And so that I felt that once we got to this material, I was on steadier ground than I had been for material that we covered earlier in the semester, which had all been useful and necessary and important, and I just was not as familiar with it. So this gave me some traction because I kind of understood more of what it was asking, and it was going back to the human element. In my work experience and in my art form and my performances, working with people and reading people, body language and words coming out of their mouths and facial expressions, and especially collaborative activities, that's at the heart of what I do. And so all of a sudden, things about the organizational culture just clicked because it made sense, where I was working with people, and so you have to put yourself in the other person's situation, and that to me was not a struggle. And I think that some people have great strengths in the areas of the class that I really struggled with, and maybe this is more towards my strength than and some others, struggled with this, whereas I didn't. I don't know.
Yeah, no, and you just there was very sophisticated analysis, and also again felt like you, authentically you, in dealing with those issues of culture. Because so there are some leaders who say, oh, organizational culture, what is that? It's just whether people are, whether they're griping a little or a lot or whatever. You want the technical knowledge, you want execution, you want yes, you want those things, but so the probably the most talked about case in this one. Some of you in the webinar may have read it in this book. The book, I've named the chapter, it's called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And he talks in this chapter about Paul O'Neill, who went on to become Secretary of the Treasury under George W. Bush, where he actually struggled more than in this role. So certain leadership philosophies in one context do very well, in others not so well. But it talks about how he came in and he was appointed this role, and that there had almost been like this script out of central casting of what you say, and you're named in this role, one of the iconic companies of the country. And then he said something. He surprised him. He said, "My number one priority is workplace safety." And it's like, whoa! What the Wall Street analysts? What it's about? Shareholder value. It's about all this and. And he said, and that's it, and people were like, what? We've hired like a lunatic. And what he did is, and so in the analysis of Duhigg, he says he basically tried to create a habit, a keystone habit, a habit. If you get that right, other good things happen. And there's a lot of research to say that when people start exercising more as an individual, people start eating better. Right. They start doing other things. For many people, that's a keystone habit. Well, the equivalent for organizations, he chose workplace safety. It was something almost everyone could agree on: the unions, the management, the board, the investors, and then the two things that came up is he said is you need to kind of signal, because all these things sometimes go into cynicism very quickly. Oh yeah, the new organizational culture, thing that'll be gone by the time it's spring break. And basically, there was a case where a worker was killed, and where Paul O'Neill basically said, and the fatalities were down. Could have just said, "Oh, this is unfortunate. We need to learn." He red alert. I failed. We failed this person. We need to get to the bottom. They studied that, and so he was like, "This is a moment to show that this isn't just some little fad that is gone in the next flavor of the month." And then there's another point. Do you remember it where there's someone? Where someone was, one of the plant managers had made a minor mistake in terms of workplace safety, and what Paul O'Neill did?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, I think it's very memorable.
Oh, no.
That's okay.
B minus.
Yeah. I'm going to revise the grades.
No.
So basically, there was a case where there was a workplace. One of the things is this is now to take transparency, and again, even when transparency is hard, and there was a plant manager, well-respected, 25-year career, made money for the company. There was a workplace safety issue that happened. He dealt with it. The worker recovered in 2 days, but didn't report it to headquarters. And actually, like a Catholic nun owning shares in Alcoa brought this to his attention at a shareholders meeting. No joke. He said, "It can't be. We know everything is reported." He investigated. Found out this guy did not report it. Again, dealt with it, solved the issue, no lasting harm, immediately fired the guy. Like that was the final nail in the coffin that this is a serious thing for this leader.
Yeah.
And all the benefits. And so we kind of spun that out. And we don't have time to do it now like we did then, but well, what does that mean for a nonprofit leader? When the way the strategy O'Neill took, and again, industry accidents were already pretty good for Alcoa, but it went to like low rates that people hadn't seen in that industry ever, and so how do you do that? He really changed the culture, and it resulted in some benefits for the bottom line of the company. So that was we spent a lot of time on that. We also talked about a case study of a burned out employee, but who was well politically connected in the community, like a small town, and we had everyone came up with a different approach. This employee was at a university, athletic director, I believe. Mm-hmm. Then we had the one Adam Grant, a book around groupthink. And how do you bring in devil's advocates? How do you actually have people challenge thinking that might only be mediocre, whereas there are lots of reasons why people often don't do that. And then we went to something that was truly a nonprofit reading. It's this book, The Happy, Healthy Nonprofit, and it's a book about how do you, in a nonprofit setting, people often don't take care of themselves. They're so dedicated to the cause, and they burn out, or they become a kind of a shadow of the professional they used to be. And so there's some very practical strategies in this chapter, really parts of two chapters that we looked at. So I know we need some time at the end to do some business and to talk about it, but just a couple of final thoughts here. If you've thought through crisis management, even at just the degree we did in that class, you're probably going to be better at dealing with them. Sorry, I'm just, I guess, trying to summarizing. The leader's role in setting the culture, and again, if you come in from out of the blue, in a well-established culture, it's not easy, but you can do it. There's some tools. Developing your personal philosophy of nonprofit leadership is something that, again, very frustrating to do it at a deep level. Writing it that it has to be you. It's not something you cut and pasted. But if you need to invest the time, and I'm very pleased that each of my students did that. But it was rigorous. I love this class. I would teach this class if they didn't pay me. I joked with my students.
You weren't supposed to say that.
I'd probably teach this course if I had to pay to teach it. And yet we're going to bring in a lot of enhancements. Strike that from the minutes. And before we turn it back over to give you some basic facts about it, any final word about this process? And thank you again for joining me today.
This has been a pleasure. Yes, I'm so appreciative that you would include me in this. I got much more out of the class. I'll be perfectly honest. I got much more out of it than I was expecting. I thought, okay, I'm a decent student. I'm a professional student. I've been doing it forever. So this, I can look at a syllabus and know what my requirements are and get through and be done and move on. Great. But this class was frustrating because it made me think a lot. Schedule-wise was very difficult, especially with the, so I work all day, and many professionals face the same issue where they're out doing things all day long, and then I like to joke that I would turn into a pumpkin at around 8:30, but the class went until 9:30, so that made it challenging, but, we made it work, and I wish, if I had to change something about the structure of the class, and maybe this is just my personal opinion, some of the material that we covered at the very beginning, I would like to continue covering at the very beginning. Some of the material in the middle, I would have liked to switch that with the stuff at the end. The things about the organizational culture and understanding how to deal with a burnt-out employee, because that was much more relatable. And that was essential to helping me understand what I needed to think about when preparing my personal philosophy. And considering that the draft of the personal philosophy was due towards the middle of the semester and not at the end, I could have used that resource because the light bulb just went on. But unfortunately, when it went on was, during finals week, and that is that is a rough couple of days if you're churning out multiple papers from multiple classes. So that would be an adjustment.
Yeah, we're going to change some of the sequencing, but well, thank you all for joining. We're going to turn it over to we'll give you some final information, but I hope to see some of you next fall in the program, and in any case, thank you for joining Shari and me today.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. So, go ahead. So I just want to give another thank you for joining us today and finish up with just a few final notes on the graduate certificate program in nonprofit management and leadership that Sheree and Alex have been talking about today. You know, if you join us and are interested, please feel free to reach out. I'll have an email at the end of this presentation. But what you'd be a part of is joining this network of really engaged, interested students like Sheree and really incredible professors like Alex to help, you know, strengthen skills that we usually don't have a chance to get, you know, unless you're in the workplace. And these kind of opportunities to develop these financial, fundraising, strategic planning, and then management skills are really essential for the nonprofit sector. And so that's what the certificate entails. It's 4 courses: management and leadership, financial management in the fall, strategic planning and fundraising in the spring. And one can take those courses either in 1 year, 2 courses each semester, or over the course of 2 years with 1 course each semester. And then last but not least, you know, we'll be accepting applications for fall 2019. Fellowship funding is available through the Duguid Institute when you apply, and we look forward to having you apply for that June 28th application. And please, for more information, visit us at the go.umd.edu website right there, and also at my email address. So thank you very much for joining us today. I know it's been a real pleasure having you. We appreciate it.